The heavy oak doors of the chapel groaned as they pushed open, stealing the breath from the entire room. I stood at the altar, my hands trembling slightly around a bouquet of white orchids and lilies. The air smelled of beeswax and expensive perfume, a scent that usually calmed me, but now my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I turned slowly, expecting to see a latecomer, perhaps a confused cousin or a flower girl who had lost her way. Instead, a collective gasp rippled through the pews, starting from the back and rolling forward like a wave of cold water. Standing under the archway of the entrance was a woman. She wasn't wearing a guest's attire. She wasn't wearing a mother-of-the-groom pantsuit or a tasteful cocktail dress. She was wearing a wedding gown. My eyes widened in horror. It was Greta, my future mother-in-law. The dress was floor-length, constructed of expensive ivory lace with a fitted bodice and a sweeping train that pooled around her feet. It was terrifyingly identical to the dress I was wearing. She beamed, lifting a gloved hand to wave at the stunned guests as if this were her grand entrance. Beside me, the officiant adjusted his glasses, looking from me to Greta and back again with wide, bewildered eyes. The silence in the room was heavy and suffocating until he leaned toward the microphone, his voice trembling. "Excuse me," he asked, the sound echoing through the hall. "Which bride is the real one?" Heat rushed to my face, burning my cheeks. I felt like I was in a nightmare where I couldn't move or speak. I looked at Darian, my fiancé, expecting him to be marching down the aisle to stop her. I expected him to be furious. Instead, he stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, watching his mother approach us with a strange mix of confusion and submission. Greta reached the altar, her heels clicking loudly on the marble, and practically snatched the microphone out of the officiant's hand. She laughed, a high-pitched, tinkling sound that grated on my exposed nerves. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she announced to the room, flashing a bright, innocent smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We're both family now. I simply thought matching dresses would symbolize our unity. Like mother, like daughter, right?" Few guests laughed awkwardly, unsure if this was a skit or a tragedy. Most just stared in horror, covering their mouths or whispering to their neighbors. I felt my stomach drop to my shoes. My special moment, the one I had planned for 2 years, was gone. It had been swallowed whole by her need for attention. I looked at Darian again, silently begging him to say something. Tell her to sit down. Tell her she was wrong. But Darian just shifted his weight, looked at the floor, and offered a weak, nervous smile. He didn't intervene. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur of gray noise. I went through the motions, saying "I do" like a robot, my voice hollow and distant. Every time I looked up, there she was, standing in the front row in her bridal gown, acting as if this was a double wedding. She even wiped a tear when Darian said his vows, making sure the photographer caught it. When the ceremony finally ended, I tried to laugh it off, thinking that if I made a scene now, I would look like the crazy one. Greta came up to hug me, squeezing me so tightly I could smell the overpowering jasmine of her perfume. She leaned close to my ear, her voice dropping to a whisper that only I could hear. The sweetness vanished from her tone. "Don't look so sour, Zoya," she hissed. "One of us had to look elegant today. You looked a bit plain." She pulled back instantly, smiling for the cameras as if she hadn't just insulted me. The pain of her insult mixed with the shock of the day. I felt tears pricking my eyes but refused to let them fall. As we moved toward the reception hall, I saw guests huddled in small groups looking at their phones. I glanced over the shoulder of a cousin and saw Instagram open. They were posting photos of the ceremony. The captions were brutal. One read, "Awkward, the groom married 2 women today." Another had tagged Greta as the other bride. The reception was supposed to be a celebration, but it felt like a battlefield where I was unarmed. We gathered for the official wedding photos in the garden, where the golden hour light should have been romantic. Instead, the photographer, a young man named Paul, looked visibly stressed. Every time he tried to frame a shot of just Darian and me, Greta would slide into the frame. She adjusted Darian's tie, smoothed his hair, and positioned herself right in the center, pushing me to the side. "Okay, let's get a shot of the happy couple," Paul said, trying to be polite but firm. "And the woman who made him," Greta chirped, linking her arm through Darian and pulling him close. In one horrifying moment, the camera's autofocus beeped, locking onto Greta's bright white dress instead of mine. I was blurry in the background of my own wedding photo. My mother, who had been biting her tongue all day for my sake, finally pulled me aside near the rose bushes. Her face was red with suppressed anger. "Zoya, she is doing this on purpose," my mom said, her voice shaking. "You have to put a stop to this." I looked over at Darian and Greta. She was laughing, whispering something to him. I strained my ears to listen. "Darian was always a mama's boy," Greta said loudly to a group of my friends. "He knows who really loves him." The DJ announced our first dance. This was the moment I had chosen a specific song for a ballad Darian and I had heard on our first date. It was meant to be ours. The lights dimmed and the spotlight hit the center of the dance floor. I took a deep breath, trying to salvage the night, and stepped forward, ready to take my husband's hand. But before I could take a second step, a blur of white lace rushed past me. Greta grabbed Darian's hand and pulled him onto the floor. "Oh, this is my favorite song," she exclaimed, though I knew for a fact she hated country ballads. She placed her hands on his shoulders and began to sway. Darian looked at me, panic in his eyes, but he didn't pull away. He didn't stop her. He started to dance with his mother to our romantic song. The guests watched in stunned silence. It was grotesque. It looked like a wedding dance, but with the wrong woman. The murmurs started again, louder this time. I stood alone on the edge of the dance floor, my arms empty, watching my husband spin his mother in a bridal gown. The humiliation was physical. It felt like a punch to the gut. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned on my heel and ran out of the ballroom, tears finally streaming down my face. I locked myself in the bridal suite, collapsing onto the velvet sofa. My makeup was streaked with black mascara tears, staining the white fabric of the cushion. I stared at myself in the mirror. I looked defeated. I looked like a victim. The door burst open and Sybil, my maid of honor and best friend since the second grade, marched in. She didn't look sad. She looked furious. Her fists were clenched at her sides. "Get up," she ordered, her voice sharp. "I can't go back out there," I sobbed, burying my face in my hands. "It's her wedding now. She won. Everyone is laughing at me." Sybil grabbed a tissue and began wiping my face aggressively. "You are not going to let that woman steal your day. You need to go back out there, but not as their doormat. You are the bride. She is just a guest in a costume." "Darian won't do anything," I whispered. "He's dancing with her." "Then you don't need Darian to fix this," Sybil said, her eyes gleaming with a dangerous idea. "I just saw the head of security in the hallway. I had a little chat with him about the venue's strict dress code policy regarding impersonation. It turns out they hate liability issues." She explained her plan. It was bold. It was loud. It was perfect. I wiped the last of my tears away, stood up, and smoothed my dress. I nodded. "Let's do it." I walked back into the ballroom. The air was thick with tension. Greta was still on the dance floor, holding court with a glass of champagne, basking in the attention she had stolen. Darian was sitting at the head table, looking miserable but silent. I didn't go to him. Instead, I walked straight to the stage where the band was playing. I signaled the lead singer to stop. The music died down instantly. The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at me. I stood tall, my voice steady, my face calm and cold. I gripped the microphone tight. "Attention, everyone," I said, my voice booming through the speakers. "I hope you are enjoying the evening. However, we have a small problem. This venue has strict policies about guests impersonating the bride to confuse staff and security." I looked directly at Greta. Her smile faltered. She looked around, confused, swirling her champagne. "We cannot have unauthorized persons creating confusion during the event," I continued, my eyes locking onto hers. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I sounded like a CEO firing an incompetent employee. Greta let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. She shouted from the floor, projecting her voice to the back of the room. "You wouldn't dare. I am the mother of the groom." I didn't blink. I simply turned my head toward the double doors at the back of the room. "Security, please proceed." The double doors swung open with a heavy thud. Two large men in dark suits entered the room. They didn't look like the friendly ushers we had greeted earlier. They looked like professional bouncers who meant business. The room gasped as they marched purposefully across the dance floor. I pointed a steady finger toward Greta. "This guest is violating the dress code and harassing the hosts," I said clearly into the mic. Remove her, please." A shockwave rippled through the guests. Mouths dropped open. Forks clattered onto plates. Darian stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Zoya, wait!" he called out, but he was too slow. He was always too slow. The guards reached Greta. One of them gestured for her to leave. "Ma'am, you need to come with us." Greta's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. She swatted the guard's hand away. "Don't touch me. Do you know who I am? I'm his mother. This is my son's wedding." "Ma'am, you are causing a disturbance," the guard said, his voice void of emotion. "Please exit the venue immediately, or we will have to escort you forcibly." Greta looked at Darian, screaming, "Darian, do something! She's throwing me out!" The desperation in her voice was piercing, but the guards were already closing in. The guards didn't wait for Darian to answer. When Greta refused to move, planting her feet, they gently but firmly took her by the arms. She began to shriek. It wasn't a cry of sadness. It was a screech of pure, unadulterated rage. Her heels clicked angrily against the hardwood floor as she struggled, but she was no match for the two men. "Ungrateful bride," she screamed, twisting her head back to glare at me. "You are ruining everything. You are jealous, jealous." As she was dragged past the tables, something incredible happened. A few guests began to whisper, and then, slowly, someone started to clap. Then another. It wasn't a thunderous applause, but a quiet, rhythmic clapping of relief. They were tired of her antics, too. They were tired of the awkwardness. I stood on the stage, watching her exit. It was the payoff I needed. She was gone. The doors closed behind her, muffling her screams. I stepped down from the stage, feeling lighter than air, but my relief was short-lived. Darian stormed up to me, his face red with fury. He got right in my face, ignoring the guests watching us. "How could you?" he hissed. "You embarrassed my mom. You had security throw her out like a criminal, on my wedding day." I looked at my new husband, really looked at him, for the first time that day. He wasn't upset that his mother had tried to ruin our wedding. He wasn't upset that she had humiliated me. He was upset that I had finally stood up for myself. He was upset that the boat had been rocked. "She embarrassed herself, Darian," I said calmly. "She wore a wedding dress to our wedding. She tried to take over everything, and you stood there and let her." "She's my mother," he shouted, not caring who heard. "She just wanted to be involved. You are so selfish. You need to go outside right now and apologize to her." I stared at him. The room was silent, everyone listening to the groom scold the bride. He wanted me to apologize to the woman who had tormented me all day. "No," I said. "Excuse me," Darian blinked, taken aback. I said no. "If you think she is the victim here, then you can go after her." He hesitated. He looked at the door, then back at me. It was a test. I held my breath, waiting for him to choose me, just this once. "Fine," he spat. "I will." He turned his back on me and marched toward the exit. He was actually leaving. He was choosing her. I felt a strange sense of clarity. I reached for my left hand, slid the diamond ring off my finger, and placed it on the table next to the wedding cake. Darian walked out the doors and didn't look back. The room was eerily quiet. I looked at the ring sitting on the white tablecloth. It glittered under the lights, a symbol of a promise that had just been broken. It looked small and insignificant now. I took a deep breath and turned to the guests. My voice trembled only slightly. "Well," I said, "the cake is already paid for, and the DJ is booked for another 3 hours. I intend to enjoy them." For a second, nobody moved. Then my friends erupted into cheers. Sybil ran over and hugged me so hard I almost fell over. My parents came to my side, my dad putting a protective arm around my shoulder. The rest of the night was strange but liberating. We danced. We ate cake. We laughed, not because it was funny, but because we had survived. I finished the reception surrounded by people who actually loved me. However, the war wasn't over. As the party wound down, Sybil checked her phone and grimaced. "Don't look," she said, trying to hide the screen. Naturally, I looked. Greta had posted a long rant on Facebook. It was a photo of her crying outside the venue, with a caption calling me a narcissistic bride who ripped a mother from her son on his big day. I went home to my parents' house that night, not the honeymoon suite. I didn't sleep. By the next morning, my phone was blowing up. I thought Greta's post would garner sympathy for her, but the internet is a strange, unpredictable place. Someone from the wedding, I still don't know who, had posted a photo of Greta in her white dress standing next to me at the altar. They captioned it, "The moment the mill decided she was the bride. Wedding fail." Greta's rant had gone viral, but not in the way she wanted. The comments on her post were vicious. People saw right through it. "Why is she wearing a wedding dress?" one user asked. "Is that the mom? That's creepy," another wrote. The screenshots spread fast. It jumped from Facebook to TikTok. By noon, millions of people had seen the image of the two brides. My phone rang. It was a number I didn't know. "Hello, Zoya?" a woman's voice asked. "I'm a journalist with a major online news outlet. We've seen the photos. We'd like to hear your side of the story." I sat in my parents' living room and gave the interview over a video call. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just told the facts. I explained the matching dress, the interruption of the vows, and the first dance. I kept my voice calm and reasonable. I didn't attack Darian, I just stated what he did. When the article came out, the headline was, "The Bride Who Fought Back." People loved it. They loved the composure. They loved that I didn't let her walk all over me. The hashtag #otherbride started trending on Twitter. Strangers were making memes of Greta being dragged out by security. It was vindication, but it felt hollow. I was famous for the worst day of my life. Then a text message popped up on my screen. It was Darian. It was the first time I had heard from him since he walked out. "You ruined our family's reputation. Mom is devastated. She can't even leave the house. Take the interview down now." I looked at the message. He still didn't get it. He was worried about their reputation, not the fact that his marriage had ended after 4 hours. I didn't reply. The backlash from Darian's family was immediate and coordinated. Aunts, cousins, and distant relatives I had only met once began messaging me. They called me heartless. They told me I should have just let Greta have her moment. "She's an old woman, you should have been the bigger person," one aunt wrote. "Family forgives." I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I simply hit the block button. One by one, I cut them off. It was emotional growth I didn't know I was capable of. I was choosing my peace over their approval. Sybil came over that evening with her laptop. "You need to see this," she said, her face pale. She had found a wedding forum, an old thread from 2 years ago. The username was Proud Momaji. It was Greta. In the post, she bragged about how she had tested every one of Darian's girlfriends to see if they were worthy. She described ruining dates, planting wrong information, and intentionally buying ugly gifts. "It wasn't just today," Sybil whispered, scrolling through the pages of toxicity. "This was a game to her. She's done this before." The forum posts were disturbing, but one detail stood out. Proud Momaji mentioned getting rid of a girl named Tatum by wearing white to her engagement party to show her who the matriarch is. I remembered Tatum. Darian had told me she was crazy and obsessive. He said she was jealous of his close relationship with his mother. I found her on Instagram and sent a message. "Hi Tatum, I'm Zoya. I almost married Darian yesterday. I think we need to talk." She replied within 5 minutes. "I saw the photos. Did she wear the lace gown?" We got on a call. Tatum sounded sane, smart, and relieved. "She wore a white lace gown to our engagement party," Tatum explained. "She told everyone it was cream and that I was colorblind. Darian took her side. That's why I left him. I knew it would never end." It was a pattern, a revealing pattern of control. Greta couldn't handle any woman taking Darian's attention. "I have photos," Tatum said, "if you need proof that this isn't a one-time thing." "I do," I said. "Send everything." The files Tatum sent were chilling. It wasn't just the engagement party. There were photos of Greta blowing out the candles on Tatum's birthday cake. Photos of Greta sitting on Darian's lap like a child. And yes, the photo of Greta at the engagement party, wearing a dress that was undeniably bridal. It was creepy. It was obsessive. It bordered on emotional incest. I sat there, looking at the evidence. Greta was trying to spin the narrative that I was a bridezilla who attacked a sweet old lady. But these photos proved she was a serial saboteur. She was a predator who hunted her son's happiness. She's going to keep lying, I told Sybil. She's already planning a podcast appearance to clear her name. So what do? Sybil asked. We don't just defend ourselves, I said, looking at the photo of Greta cutting Totem's cake. We expose the whole history. We make this public, but smartly. We show the world she's not a victim, she's an abuser. A week later, I received an email from a producer named Rosalind. She worked for a streaming service known for its gripping documentaries. Zoya, we are creating a docuseries on toxic family dynamics and the psychology of control. We've followed your story. We want to feature you. I hesitated. Reality TV could be trashy. I didn't want to be a spectacle. But Rosalind promised it would be a serious investigation, not a drama show. I agreed on one condition. We tell the truth with evidence and we include Totem's story. Just as I signed the release forms, my phone rang. It was a blocked number. A stiff, formal voice spoke. Ms. Zoya, this is Attorney Kale representing Greta. We are filing a lawsuit against you for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We advise you to cease all public statements. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. She was suing me. She wanted to silence me through the courts. She wanted to bleed me dry. The lawsuit was ridiculous, but scary. Greta was claiming that my stunt with security caused her PTSD and ruined her social standing. She wanted money, a lot of it. I hired a lawyer, a sharp woman named Vance. She reviewed the case and the wedding venue contract. 2 days later, she called me, laughing. Zoya, come to my office. You're going to love this. When I arrived, Vance slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was the contract I had signed with the wedding venue. She pointed to Clause 14B. Safety protocols. Guests are prohibited from wearing clothing that obstructs movement or mimics staff emergency personnel principles, bridegroom, to ensure clear identification during emergencies. Greta, bride outfit wasn't just rude, Vance grinned. It was a breach of safety protocols. By wearing it, she became a liability. You didn't defame her. You enforced the venue's safety contract. The venue actually supports your decision. They are tired of guests like her, too. The lawsuit was about to flip. Greta had walked right into a trap she set for herself. We went to court for the preliminary hearing. Greta arrived in a wheelchair, wearing a neck brace. It was pure theater. She cried dramatically when the judge looked at her, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. I only acted out of love for my son, she wailed. She treated me like an animal. I am a fragile woman. My lawyer, Vance, stood up calmly. Your Honor, we would like to submit video footage from the venue. She played the clip. It showed Greta pushing a security guard. It showed her screaming insults. It showed her physically resisting and scratching one of the guards. It didn't look like a frail old lady. It looked like a violent outburst. Then Vance played the clip of Greta's toast where she said, "One of us had to look elegant." The courtroom went silent. The judge looked at Greta, who had stopped crying and was now glaring at the screen. "This does not look like emotional distress, Mrs. Greta," the judge said dryly. "This looks like disorderly conduct." The judge adjourned the session, but the look on Greta's face told me she knew she was losing control. The next day, Darian filed for divorce. He cited irreconcilable differences and public humiliation. He didn't fight for me. He didn't apologize. He just wanted to cut ties and protect his mother. I didn't contest it. I signed the papers with a flourish. The freedom arc had begun. I was no longer attached to that toxic web. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't realized I was carrying. As I was leaving the lawyer's office, I got a message from a new journalist, a woman named Mina. She wasn't an entertainment reporter. She was an investigative journalist. "Zoya, I've been digging into Greta's finances because of the viral story. I found something bigger than a wedding dress. Can we meet?" I met her at a coffee shop. Mina looked serious. She opened her laptop. "Greta claims to be a wedding consultant, right? Mina asked. Yes, that's her business, I nodded. Well, she has no clients, but she has hundreds of thousands of dollars moving through her accounts. Mina explained the scheme. Greta had been the executor of her late husband's estate. It turned out she was embezzling money from the trust fund meant for charity and laundering it through her fake wedding consulting business. She uses the weddings she helps plan to write off massive expenses, Mina said. The dresses, the venues, the trips. She writes them off as business expenses for a business that does no work. She's using these poor girls' weddings to clean dirty money. I connected the dots. Greta's obsession with weddings wasn't just emotional, it was financial. She needed to be involved to hide the money trails. My wedding was just another opportunity for her to move cash around. The dress she bought, Mina asked, paid for by the charity fund. Oh my God, I whispered. Federal investigators are getting involved, Mina said. This is going to blow up, and Darian is a signatory on the accounts. The fall of the Queen happened fast. Greta was in the middle of a live-streamed interview for her image restoration podcast when it happened. She was talking about how ungrateful daughters-in-law destroy families. Suddenly, loud banging was heard in the background. Voices shouted, "Federal agents, open up." The camera captured Greta's face as she realized what was happening. It went from smug to terrified in a split second. She tried to reach for the laptop to cut the feed, but she was too slow. The feed cut out, but the audio kept rolling for another 10 seconds. We heard the handcuffs click. We heard her reading her rights. The twist came later that evening on the news. Darian was arrested too. He had been signing the checks. He was implicated for helping hide the transactions. He wasn't just a mama's boy, he was an accomplice. I received a subpoena the next week. I wasn't the defendant anymore. I was the witness. The trial was the final chapter of the nightmare. I sat on the witness stand, dressed in a sharp navy suit. I testified calmly, detailing Greta's manipulations. I told the jury about the wedding dress incident, not just as a complaint about fashion, but as evidence of her need for total control and her use of funds. She told me one of us had to look elegant while wearing a dress bought with stolen charity money, I told the jury. The courtroom was packed. The story had become a national sensation. People were fascinated by the audacity of the woman in the white dress. When I stepped down from the stand, I looked at the defense table. Greta was staring at me. Her eyes were dark, filled with hate. She mouthed 3 words to me across the room. "You stole my son." I looked at Darian, sitting beside her, head in his hands. I hadn't stolen him. She had consumed him. I just saved myself. The verdict came back after 2 days of deliberation. Guilty. Greta was sentenced to prison for fraud, embezzlement, and public disorder. Darian received a lesser sentence, probation and fines, but his reputation was destroyed. He would never work in finance again. I walked out of the courthouse into the sunlight. The cameras were there, flashing and clicking, but I didn't stop to talk. I felt free, legally, emotionally, and physically free. A few months later, the production company that made the documentary offered me a book deal. They wanted me to write about boundaries and surviving toxic in-laws. I accepted. I received one last package from Greta, sent from the prison mail system. It was checked by guards, of course. Inside, there was no letter, just a piece of white tulle. It was a piece of her veil. It was a final attempt to haunt me, a reminder of the day she tried to ruin. I threw it in the trash can on my way out. I didn't even look back. 5 years later, I stood in front of a mirror again. This time, the reflection showed a woman who was happy. My dress was simple, a sleek, modern silk gown with no lace, no train, just elegance. No drama. I walked out into the garden where Lucien was waiting. He was a kind, grounded man who loved his mother, but had clear boundaries. He turned and smiled when he saw me, tears in his eyes. As I prepared to walk down the aisle, Sybil, still my maid of honor, adjusted my veil. She leaned in and whispered, "I checked the guest list. No sign of another bride, right?" I laughed, a genuine, joyful sound. "Not this time." I walked down the aisle, my eyes fixed on Lucien. The air was clear. The music was perfect. I finally got my day, and I didn't need to share it with anyone. I had survived the fire, and I had come out the other side, not as the other bride, but as the only one that mattered.